The Security Weekly News is live on Tuesdays and Fridays at 12 o'clock Eastern Time most every week. I try to scan and produce a quick look at some major stories to help you keep up with what's going on in and around the industry in a short format. Myself, Jason Wood, and other guest commentators provide greater insight every week. I'm Doug White, and I hope that you will look for the Security Weekly News in all of your favorite podcast catchers and subscribe for the latest content.
Welcome back to Business Security Weekly. I am your host, Matt Alderman, joined by Ben Carr and Josh Marvin. You can now find us on Instagram. You won't find me on Instagram, but you can find us on Instagram. Follow us for highlight reels, giveaway announcements, and more at Sec Weekly. All right, gentlemen, that was a great discussion. We're going to cover pieces of that in the news segment here in the articles and leadership communications articles. First article comes from Forbes. Forbes publishes kind of you're seeing a lot of writing on the SEC regulations for obvious reasons. Last Friday, the regulations kicked in effect for any company that now closes after Friday. The new cybersecurity reporting stuff is in place. So this article kind of breaks down the requirements and some other just good information, I thought, as a whole. And where I wanted to get into is there's a section in here around compliance reminders. And Jason's really good at this. Unfortunately, he lost power today. But I think about this list, and I think about the order of this list, right? So it says, here are some key steps companies can take, right? And again, I think about order. So involve senior stakeholders. Now, that makes sense, right? We've been talking about how security risk is a business risk. I got to work with the other business leaders. Then it goes through the series of things, right? It says train your employees, invest in cyber resilience response, assume cyber attacks are inevitable, extend cybersecurity policies. Then it says conduct regular board risk assessment and policy reviews. I'm pretty sure I should be doing risk assessments and policy updates review sooner than implementing all this other stuff that was after involved the senior stakeholders. I'm just saying.
Reviewing policy. Go ahead, Ben. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I also think assume cyber attacks are inevitable and plan accordingly. That's kind of the first thing you should do. I mean, it's the warning order that has to go out to everybody that this is going to happen. Like, let's get on the stick and plan, and do all the planning. Then conduct the risk assessments and update your reviews. And as part of that, you're going to involve stakeholders. But yeah, you've got to get out in front of this, right? The context of the article, when I looked at it, at the end, they start to talk about board directors' preparation and maintaining focus on growth. And in the people I've talked to, even though I thought this was going to at least start to push things forward, I'm not seeing the momentum in the market. I'm not really seeing the changes that I would have expected.
You know when we're going to see them, right? Is when somebody gets hauled into court because the SEC is going to do enforcement. To your point, Ben.
Someone other than the CISO.
Right.
Someone other than the CISO gets called into court, right? When it's not the CISO of SolarWinds and it's the CEO of SolarWinds, then I think we might see some changes.
So somebody other than the designated scapegoat?
Well, yeah. I didn't bring this up on the last segment, but less than half of the Fortune 500 has a CISO. So who owns this? There is no CISO in those environments. So the CFO, the chief risk officer, Ben, we're going to get to your point sooner than later, I think, because for the Fortune 500 who don't have a CISO, the CRO, the CFO, somebody else is going to get pulled into this mix, aren't they?
Well, I mean, depends. Do they have a VP of security? Do they have, they might have a CISO in all but name. They just might not have a C in their title. But effectively, there's somebody in charge of security at most of the Fortune 500s.
But I don't think that's going to cut it. Ultimately, right? If you've got a director level security person in an organization, and the SEC comes knocking, that's not going to hold water with them. They're going to want to know who from management had the ball on this, right? I think
from the C-suite had the ball on this. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Giving somebody a C title at least gives some amount of coverage that they can say you're the named guy, in the documents. But that named guy is going to be reporting to somebody, right? That director is going to be reporting to either the CIO or legal or somebody else. And if I was in the C-suite and I didn't have the experience for this, I'd want to get out of the way of the train that's coming my way. I really, really would. Uh-huh. But I'm not seeing it in the market. I'm not seeing the changes there. I'm not seeing, you would think there would be, to your point, Matt, I thought the number was about 93, but maybe it's higher than that. But there is a significant part of the Fortune 500 that doesn't have a CISO. You would think there would be a lot of open recs out there right now, and I'm not seeing it. Like, I'm actually seeing some of it go the reverse, where they're trying to push this down to directors or VP level people. And that's a recipe for failure, I think, right?
And the SEC is not going to want that position accountable. So I was talking, I think I brought this up last week when I was in Boston. I was talking to a corporate CFO below the Fortune 500. Security rolls to him. He's the one on the hook. He's going to be the one on the hook.
Yep.
And I think there are other organizations similar to that, Ben.
And there are, but here's the thing. A CFO can tell you why they did what they did and for what reason. In other words, we decided not to put in a blah, blah, blah security system of some sort, whatever the tool is, the training, the whatever. And because the risk was here and the possible reward or mitigation of risk was here. So or vice versa or whatever. So they're able to justify that because they're equating risk in dollars, which is appropriate in my opinion. Whereas if you put it up to a CIO and they're like, yeah, I didn't feel like doing it this year, the SEC is going to be like, oh, go to jail, go straight to jail. Do not collect $200, Like, that's the point. You have to put this under someone who can...
Even in the CFO, if they're not capable of understanding the decisions they're making and they're making that's malpractice, that's malfeasance, that's not doing their duty, right? Like, I think that's where you're going to have a problem with those roles.
I agree and disagree. They may not understand the technology specifically. So you're right, but here's the thing. Let's assume you've got a director of security, just for purposes of argument. And the director of security rolls up to the CFO. Just bear with me for a second, okay? And the director of security goes, look, we can do this or we can do this. Here are the various risks affiliated with each of these. Here are the costs affiliated with each of these. You make the choice, but I'm telling you what the choices are and what the effective impact or ramifications of those choices are. Then the CFO or the CIO, whomever it rolls up to, makes that choice based on those descriptions. Now, they're still on the hook for that decision, but they've had a good conversation understanding what those decisions mean, and they can justify it based on the dollars of risk, the dollars of customer data lost, the dollars that it costs to protect it, all those things. Then I say we're defensible.
I don't disagree with you on that, but what you're making is the argument that everyone should report to the CFO.
No,
well,
no.
Like CIO, CFO, somebody.
You made for IT, for legal, for say, like, all those risks can be evaluated by the CFO from a financial perspective, and I don't
risk
think
officer.
That's the point.
No,
it isn't. It could be the CIO, the chief risk officer, but whomever has that C title that those functions roll up to should be able to point back to their notes and go, here are the choices I was given. Here are the options that were presented to me, and here's why that choice was made this way. And when you can do that kind of thing, you're doing something defensible. When you can't do it, we're like, well, they thought that it was probably a bad idea. Then what the hell? That's not defensible. That's the go to jail.
Josh, what you just described is the reason why you have to do cyber risk quantification. You have to, because it has to be quantified into dollars and cents, regardless of who owns it, CFO or somebody else, which takes me back to the last segment, which is why we had that segment, is that to me is still the missing part of this is we're not consistent when it comes to risk quantification for cyber, and we have to be. That's what we have to solve. That's what's going to get us through this. And this whole list of all the other things in this article are like, yeah, but until I do that, I don't even know what to implement.
No, I agree with you on that. Like that, and that I think gets down to the core of like I've seen a lot of things we talked about. I think in an article last week where it was like, should the SEC regulate this? And that's what the SEC should regulate, right? That's what a reasonable investor wants to know is, do the dollars and cents make sense? Like, I've got $10 to invest. Do I invest one in cyber or one more in sales to get more revenue, right? If I understand that, I'm taking a risk, but like, it's an acceptable risk, right? I'm going to do that. And so that's where the SEC should come into play. Now, there are other aspects of this that broach other regulatory concerns, right? That I think haven't weighed in yet and are still trying to catch up. But that is why the SEC should weigh in on this area, and why we need, I agree, why we need some type of measures to say, this is the risk against the other risks that the business has. And this is why I prioritize one versus the other.
Yeah, and by the way, a corollary of this is if you are a CISO and you are the one presenting the options and not making the choices, you should not have a C in your name because you should not be liable.
Agreed.
In your title,
Yeah.
rather, not your name.
I mean,
you can still be named with a C, but your title should not be CISO. It should be VP of Security, Director of Security. If you're not making the choices, if you cannot bind the company with your signature, if you cannot decide which direction you're going, you're not a CISO, and you shouldn't be one. You're only there to literally be a scapegoat.
So the second article is a Gartner article, and you can download some of these assets for free, which is about building a strategic security program. Because this is the other thing that I think organizations are going to have to start to figure out is, how do I build a defensible program? And so Gartner has some really good reference material out here that I pulled in the second article, because once you identify those risks and you break down some of those things that I need to implement, how do I go about building out my program? So Gartner's got some guidelines here. I'm not sure how aligned they are to part of this conversation, but I thought it was still a good reference article for people who are trying to figure some of this out.
And there's some good points in here, right? Like, I think, they talk about in the first point, right, that the CEO needs to actually understand and sign off and endorse and affirm and give the mandate to the CISO to actually do his job. And I know a lot of CISOs that don't have that, right? It's, hey, go do this, but then the mandate doesn't flow through and the rest of the org doesn't see that. And so it's very hard to get the job done. And then the other thing I like was 3 in the governance structure, right, where they call out the CISO functionally, ideally reports outside the office of the CIO to avoid conflicts. And that's where it's been. I mean, I think if you're a product-based company delivering a SaaS solution, shouldn't report to the CPO or the CTO. Right? Because that's fraught with potential conflicts as well. If you're not going to report to the CEO directly, it has to be in the least means of conflict.
Yep. It's that whole accountability discussion that we were just talking about, Josh.
And that whole can you just make it yellow so we can report it to the board is better? I forget who said that.
Yeah.
When it's dollars and cents, there is no yellow.
Exactly. It's so much easier to work in dollars if you can make everything work that way, because then I can just compare apples to apples, dollars to dollars. It's so much easier.
Getting a model where you can actually put dollars to stuff is so hard, but if you can get there, it pays off in such great dividends, because that dollars and cents is the language of the business. They understand that. And it's easy to contextualize and say, look, if this happens, here's the potential to the business. You have to make sure that you can back that up and prove it, right? It's not just a swag. But if you can do that, it's easy to understand what the right decision is in that context for the rest of the business.
Yeah. Do you know what this reminded me of? This whole article reminded me of Sarbanes-Oxley.
Look, I'm having deja vu, Josh, with this, right? I mean, this is exactly where we were back in the early 2000s with Sarbanes-Oxley. Only it was a CFO conversation. We had a little bit of that piece. We've made this more mainstream, and now it's a CISO conversation, or whoever's going to own cyber risk in the organization. Just like the CFO was on the hook for the financial risk 20 years ago. Yeah, we're back to a deja vu all over again. Yeah.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
All right, let's get into some leadership. I got a couple fun articles at the end. It's our last show of the year, so I want to pull in some fun stuff. Let's see, exploring often overlooked leadership attributes. We talk a lot about leadership on this show. There's a couple. We talk a lot about empathy, so I didn't want to talk about that one. Humility. Oh my gosh, how important is it to be humble as a leader? Especially when you think about servant leadership, we don't always think about humility. Sometimes as a leader, I think an overlooked trait for leaders, patience, obviously. Look, as a leader, sometimes you're very impatient. Like, we got to go, we got to get things done. But there's also an aspect of being patient as things are happening. So again, just some really good traits that I wanted to hit in this article and pull out.
Yeah, and I think some of these, like I went to patience and I went to humility, and when I think about them, it's interesting to look at this list if you are a leader and think about where do I have a natural aversion, right? Because there are people that are I'm a type A personality. I want to get stuff done. I don't have the patience to sit around and get stuff, wait for other people to execute. And so I'll dive in and get stuff. But that's a problem, right? That's where you need to be, again, self-aware, understand what makes up your personality and where you need to kind of lean in to kind of figure out, well, if I'm more patient in this, it gives other people more time. I can be more respectful of the others on my team, right? It'll pay dividends, and I think the perception that you have within the organization. So I think that's a good way to look back back at this is where does it kind of irk you that you have to spend time in that? And that's obviously probably where you need to spend more time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And be patient with your people, because a lot of them, you be patient with them and train them up and groom them, and they will follow you to the gates of hell.
Yeah, and that's a good tie-in to the next article, actually, Josh, because this next article from Harvard Business Review is what makes a company great at producing leaders, and it all boils down to the people, right? It's all about the people. This article talks about the strategy around hiring, the investment into training and development. It is a people issue at the end of the day, and I think it's something we don't think about maybe is as a way to cultivate leaders, but it is so important around your strategy for hiring, your investment, your culture, the environment that you're in. Like, this is what's cultivating the next set of leaders, and it all boils down to a bunch of people problems.
Yeah, I had two thoughts that came out of this. The first was, you have to think about the people who you're bringing along in the team and how you're developing leaders. And it really speaks well of you to be able to point out and to say, look, I've got people that have followed me from job to job, right? As I've moved along in my career, I brought them with me. They wanted to participate. But also, who have you sent on to do other things, right? Like, if you can point to, if you're a CISO and you can say, hey, look, there's these other 3 CISOs of these important companies that used to work for me and they were part of my leadership team that I grew, I think that speaks a lot about you. The other thing that when I read this article and I really wanted to call out, and I'm interested for your thoughts, Matt and Josh, it's interesting that we talk about CISOs trying to get a seat at the table, right? But I think back to the organizations and colleagues and peers that I know. There's not really a lot of effort. There's this concern of, hey, the CISOs aren't acting in a business way, like they're not really ready for this. But what are corporations actually doing to train the leaders in cyber to actually participate and operate at an executive level? There's investment that needs to be done. And I think that's an area where we really should call that out. I'd like to see companies actually working on that, and where there's a deficit, but it's required for the business, figure out how to make the investment to bring those people along to make them fully rounded.
Agreed. I mean, I learned a lot of these skills, luckily, through different positions I've held, but you're right, Ben. Like, how many people are proactively trying to make sure that these leaders understand cyber and how to talk cyber and how to understand it. And that's an investment area that maybe we don't see enough of.
We absolutely don't see enough of it. We see people getting let go rather than getting trained. It is so cheap, comparatively speaking. You don't want to give raises this year? Give them a training class. Give them a training class in technical presentation and technical writing. Give them a training class in speaking business. Give them a lunch and learn with the executives of your own company to teach how do you talk to us? How do you communicate with us? Do you know how effective that stuff is?
Pair up your CISO with another exec and time at the hip and say, this is a mentor relationship. We're going to bring you along so you can understand the rest of the business. Like, I would really like to see that.
I've wanted to see that for 20 years, as apprenticeships and mentorships. And unfortunately, we see it in various places, but it's almost fallen by the wayside in the last few years, as 415,000 people at tech firms have been let go in the last year. And so it's an entry level is now you have 5 years experience, so you're entry level. And it's like, wait, what? It's crazy. So the cultivation of talent internal to a company is rare. And if you find yourself at a company where they're cultivating you as talent, they're like, oh, go to a conference. Here's a training session. Here's who you can learn from learn the business from. Like, don't go anywhere. Stay there. Okay? Learn from them. Get that kind of mentorship done and get that network built, and it'll pay you in dividends for the rest of your life.
Yep. And when you're in these sessions, you need good icebreakers to start the conversation. So my next article, my fun article, is 80 folks, different kind of icebreakers that you could use to kick off a meeting. We are not going to go through all these, but if you're looking for icebreaker ideas, this article is awesome. It lists all kinds of stuff in here that you can use to kick off a meeting, a training, to get to know people. Again, it was my fun article for the week.
I loved it, Matt. It was you need these all
I like
the
the
time.
show and tell.
So I think it's great to have a list and to go back and reference and pull something up different. Have something not the same icebreaker and everything. With 80, you should be able to go through quite a few meetings without running back to the start.
I liked number one, show and tell. This is literally my mug. It was custom made for me by a potter when I was a blacksmith 30 years ago. Okay,
Right.
at a historical village. So that's kind of fun. People love that crap.
There are 2 truths and a lies in here. There's a bunch of good ones. There's what's your spirit animal? Like there are a ton in here, folks. So if you need ideas, it's a great article to pull to. Science of the People do a great job. I actually have 2 of their articles in here because it's the end of the year. The last article we're going to cover this week is another Science of the People article. And the reason I pulled this in, we're almost at the end of the year. And at the end of the year, we start thinking about the new year. We start thinking about our New Year's resolution. And I don't like to cover news articles on here's the top trends or here's my resolutions for next year. But what I thought this article was really good for is for people to use as a guide to kind of self-reflect on you as a person. This article is, I think it's called 10 life-changing what's it called? 10 life-changing something or others to make you a better person. And it gives you, it kind of walks you through these 10 steps, and they're listed in the summary of the article. But I thought it was a good way to just sit back and kind of reflect. Like, you as a person, how do I get better? And what are the things, where am I doing well? Where am I not doing well? And what are the things I want to change next year? So here it is. It's my gift to everyone. It's your self-reflection article. No comments?
Yep, it was no.
It was good.
I look. I think it's always good to kind of go back and assess and figure out what things you want to do better, what things you need to change. And look, the one that I really clued in was fear. Right, embrace the fear of failure. I mean, you're never going to get better if you're only operating in comfort, right? You've got to operate and stretch yourself. And so, you get that opportunity. Somebody gives you a stretch project. I don't know. That really concerns me. Can I do it? Make the attempt, right? Shoot your shot. Do the best you can do and learn something from it, right? Whether if you fail, you're always going to learn something out of that failure. So I think that's a great one.
Failure
and
is
give
an
your people
incredible
room
learning
to
experience.
fail.
I'm a serial entrepreneur. What that means is I fail a lot and I keep tripping, but eventually I'm going to get up and start running. And I'm doing that now, and it's amazing. And it's slow, it's ugly, it's a god-awful process, but it works. One of the best lessons I learned that I don't think is in here is eat the frog. The thing that you don't want to do that's on your to-do list, do it first. Just eat the frog.
Yeah. Yep. Yes, gentlemen, thank you for joining me today. Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening. This is our last show of 2023. I'd like to wish everyone a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. We'll see you next year on Business Security Weekly.